Buddy, I know for some folks we either just got off the spring break or we are on spring break, so I'm glad you're here. Hopefully the weather's finally getting to be spring. We are talking about storytelling today, and we're going to do kind of an interesting approach to storytelling. Is we're going to talk about some different kinds of storytellers. A couple things so that you know you are muted. That's in part for the recording, but also to cut back on background noise. If you have questions, type them into the box, and hopefully we'll have time. We'll also record this so that you will get a link to the recording. But let's get started and see what we can do. Here's our plan. I want to talk a little bit about why storytelling, and because storytelling is everywhere right now, all over kind of blogs and articles and conferences, and this notion of storytelling, particularly as it relates to assessment, has really caught fire. But that definitely has not always been the case. And sometimes answering that sort of high-level rationale question can help us think more clearly about what we're looking for throughout kind of the rest of the presentation, or why this has some meaning, or why it might have some meaning for some places maybe you don't think it does. So I am going to start with that kind of notion of why storytelling. Then what I'm going to do is do something a little bit unique. We're going to take one story, and we're going to take a story of retention, and I'm going to actually give you some data like you would if you had that kind of data on your campus. And then we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of storytellers. And we're going to talk about each of these folks, a journalist, a blogger, an artist, and a preacher. And we're going to talk just very, very high level about kind of how they, why they frame a story, what their purpose is, how they frame a story, maybe even some of the either structures or tools that they use, and then we're going to take that retention story and show it for each of, like how each of the 4 might tell that very same story, so you can really get some concrete examples about what this might look like, so we don't stay too theoretical, but you get that notion. Now, if by chance you are listening today and you have a strong background in any of these 4 storytelling types, if you were a journalism major, if you regularly write for blogs and really know what you're doing, if you're an artist either by training or like me by hobby, or if you have a background, particularly the kind of preacher model we're going to use is a kind of a traditional Christian preacher. If you have that kind of background, please give me some leeway. Clearly we have, 30 minutes, an hour here to talk. So we're going to say so high level that at some level, if you have a strong background, you're going to get a little embarrassed by how high level I am. But this is sort of to lay some groundwork to get us thinking about different kinds of storytellers, what they might do, so that people can figure out whether they want to do a little more homework or think about that kind of storyteller, or do some, I don't know, additional thinking, research, reading about storytellers and different types of ones and which ones might work in their setting. So I'm being very purposeful in staying high level, although I know it's almost painful for those of us who have a background in these, because clearly I can't do justice to any of these 4 folks who have, I don't know, such depth of expertise in what they do. So again, if you have that background, kind of bear with me and know that we're just trying to spark some interest, get people thinking. Okay, that said, let's go back to that original question, why storytelling? We actually started talking about storytelling, I don't know, 4 years ago, something like that. And I think at some level, we had to answer this question more clearly then than we do now. And what we began when we were talking about storytelling is we began with the more traditional kinds of stories where you have an opening and you have the hook and the pieces and the steps through, and you have maybe the climax and an ending. And we did the more traditional kind of storytelling that they still teach, actually. I saw it in my daughter's first grade class where they're teaching them the structure of stories. And that presentation is one that we periodically do. I know we're doing it at the end of April again. But I think that there's some real power to that kind of storytelling mode. But one of the things we found as we talked about that storytelling mode is that there were a lot of questions, even for us, but even audience member questions about, well, wait, what if my president, board, parents, students, faculty, staff, whoever it may be, wants a different kind of story? And so that's the impetus for what you're going to see today is different kinds of stories. But there's no kind of argument with the fact that storytelling itself has enormous potential for assessment, and thinking of our data or our results or our or whatever we're learning about our programs from a story perspective can make how we share data more powerful. So let's do a little bit of kind of groundwork. What is a story? If you think very traditionally, a story is an account of imaginary or real people or events, and it's told for entertainment. We don't often put the word entertainment with assessment. So that alone should spark a little bit of thinking. Stories are often told or recounted in some sort of form of causally linked events. And that's the traditional mode. If you think about a an adventure story, one thing happens, then the next, then the next. And although they don't have to necessarily cause each one, there is that structure that keeps the story moving forward. When we talk about these different kinds of storytellers, that structure is going to be slightly different, and we'll highlight that. But when you think about a traditional story or a story in general, these are kind of the definitions of what we're talking about. The reason that there's power in stories are things like this. Stories engage listeners. So it's not so much of a lecture, it's this kind of shared experience. And they get that listener, that audience member thinking and involved in that story. Oftentimes the power of stories comes from the fact that it connects to existing knowledge. So whether that is it's connecting to a shared value, a shared experience, a shared reaction. There's something that it connects to that the audience members already have, so it's more likely to be memorable. It's holistic. If you notice, I misspelled it. I kind of misspelled this purposefully because I think there is this sort of, or actually this one's not, sometimes I misspell it with a W on the front, is because a story isn't little bits and pieces. A story is a bigger package of those pieces, and that holistic nature of it also gives it power. Pulling out a single piece kind of changes what you're looking at, but when you think of the story, when you think of something like a favorite book or a favorite movie or a favorite TV show, you may have a memorable moment, but you think of the story in general, of the things that happened and how they related to each other, and stories become shared experiences. If you sit in an audience and something is really powerful in terms of a story, audience members will often just discuss it in the hallway afterwards. Or it becomes something that we talk about, language that we change, and it becomes a shared experience between the storyteller and the audience, where they engage in this sort of conversation or this back and forth in a way that other kinds of, I don't know if I want to say dialogue, but other kinds of sharing maybe don't. Okay? The power of stories also comes from things like emotions. There's no question that an emotional response helps trigger memories or connect it into memories so you remember it longer. So if the story hits an emotion, you're more likely to remember it. And so that creates a powerful, instigator in ways that other kinds of lectures or dialogues might not. The power of stories also comes from those connections to larger truths. If you think traditional stories, the good guy wins, hard work pays off, or it can actually contradict those larger truths and therefore create power, right? And oftentimes stories show us rather than tell us. They don't tell us, they don't say, hey, this is the good guy and the good guy's going to win. They show it through actions and results and that movement of the story through the process. Okay? So if you think about this in assessment kinds of pieces or in kind of this assessment kind of world, assessment data sharing is often not told in that story mechanism. It is often told, like if you look at these pictures, in this much more formal construct. And it's often packaged in language that is research language, sometimes even statistical, or even if you're doing the qualitative kinds of stories, you still can get caught up in some of that qualitative research methodology language that can make, I don't know, the sharing of it less accessible. And if you contrast that kind of, that notion of assessment data sharing in this formal kind of atmosphere with the formal language, maybe even formal structures and methodologies and little bits of data and little bits of results, and you put that up against a storyteller. Don't know if you know one. This one's Todd Snyder. He's got a great song about statistician's blues. But even just looking at him, the feel and the flavor is so different. The engagement is so different, and that he paints pictures with his stories, things that you remember, that you engage in, that kind of stick with you. And so this is why I guess we got started talking about storytelling, but I also think this is why storytelling has really captured so many audiences right now, is this notion of, wow, what if assessment data or results or whatever it may be, retention data, what if it were told and in a way that feels more like storytelling? And fundamentally, if you think about it, one of the big reasons why we're talking about storytelling so much, oh, sorry, I forgot about the animation here. You can see research, statistical, sharing pieces of data, painting a picture, engaging. Okay, if you think about the purpose of sharing assessment data, the goal is action. And that formal storyteller to prompt action has got some big hurdles, whereas a more traditional storyteller or somebody who paints a bigger picture, who is more artistic, may motivate action in different ways. And so if the goal truly is about action, then storytelling can fit in. And I hope you'll see that as we kind of go through this. So that's why we're talking storytelling. I told you 4 different kinds. Let me show you the story that we're going to use. We're showing you a very, very basic story about student retention. What I'm going to do is use some data from MapWorks, the Student Success and Retention System, and some of the surveys there. And fundamentally, we're looking at data, I think it's 2013, for first-year students. And 87% of the first-year students who started in fall semester were marked as returned in the spring semester. So 13% did not come back. If you look at some other outcomes here, their average GPA was a 2.77, pretty good. Standard deviation, you can see there's definitely some variability. And on average, they earned 12.4 credits. So they're making some progress, right? Look pretty good. Here's a couple other pieces of data. These are survey questions from those students. To what extent are they committed to completing a degree? You can see 81% are extremely committed to completing a degree. If you love numbers and tables, this kind of speaks to you. For many audiences, this is a lot of numbers. But I want you to see a couple things. In general, students plan to stay. And if you think about completing a degree, yes, absolutely. If you think about completing a degree at this institution, there's a little more variability, but we're still sitting real far on that kind of extremely side. If you look at coming back next term, 83% are planning on coming back. I already just showed you 87% did. And if you think about coming back next year, you've got 71% on that 7 scale. You've got almost nobody sitting on those low ends. That's a lot of data. You can imagine if I were presenting it at the front of the room, I would do a whole lot more about methodology, right? Response rates and who these students are and how many campuses. The other thing I would do is I would do even more because, of course, how about some correlations? How about the fact that persistence is correlated to degree commitment? These are all significant relationships, although you can see the strength of the relationships is varied. And it gets stronger the shorter the intention time frame, right? You know, spring, coming back in spring is more tightly related to persistence than finishing a degree. Okay, and one more piece of data just in case. This is the actual retention rate for those who intended to return based on the extent they intended to return. So if you remember, it was a 7-point scale. If you take the 1s and the 2s, which is almost nobody, 52% of them are back in January, February. If you think of the 3s, 4s, and 5s, 77% of them are back. And if you think of the 6s and 7s, which is the majority of the students, 90% of them are back. So there's definitely some interesting data here. There's definitely some interesting stories we could do. And we could do a traditional kind of story of, you know, here were their intentions and this is what happened. And you could do a very traditional story. But let's look at some different kinds of storytellers and how they would put this together. And I told you 4, we're going to do a journalist, a blogger, an artist, and a preacher, and tell this story. So let's talk about the journalist first. I don't know about you. This one, I definitely don't have training in journalism. So again, if you're a journalist by training, forgive me. But I remember learning some about journalists and journalistic writing. I remember doing some of that work even as late as high school and how they put together a story. If you think about the purpose of a journalist as a storyteller, their purpose is to provide facts and enable decision. It's news is that part of communication that keeps us informed of the changing events, issues, and characters in the world. So this is about providing the facts, providing the information that I need to understand the story, right? If you think about the structure of a journalistic article, you have a headline at the top. You have the most important questions often in that first paragraph, and then you have details. This is, we used to call it the inverted pyramid. I don't know if they still use that technology or that kind of language, but the idea is that the most important stuff comes first. I don't know about you. I've worked for administrators who this is what they want. Give me the headline. Give me the, you know, what is it, the 5 W's and the H, who, what, when, why, how. And then if I want to ask you about the details, I'll ask you about the details, but I might not need those. Okay? So this structure, I think, is one that we've all seen, that we've all experienced, and we've talked to audiences who are looking for this structure, and if we do a more traditional story or too much detail or too many data points, they're going to be unhappy because they want the headline, they probably want the most important questions. If you think about that retention piece, this story is going to play a little bit differently. Now, I'm going to warn you, I took a little bit of a journalistic approach in that how do I get a headline that draws attention? Oftentimes that's negative. So it might be something like the headline that you see at the top. College dropout problem continues this year. I don't know about you, as somebody who sat on the campus, 87% coming back actually is good for many campuses, but maybe not for all. And if I want a headline that grabs attention, maybe that's not it. Maybe this is it. And if you think about that as the headline, the attention grabber, college dropout problem continues, then you start looking down the list for more. 1 in 10 new college students drops out after their first semester. We've got those numbers, 13%, right? Then you start doing details. Although 95% of the students who participate in MapWorks are committed to completing a degree, 13% do not come back. And then you start really getting into detail stuff. And the detail here could be things like an example student says this, an expert says this, other studies say this, whatever it may be. Maybe it's longitudinal stuff. You start giving that context, those details, to the story that is presented high level. Feel familiar? Journalistic stories, I think, are things we're used to, right? And this is a very different approach to telling a retention story than some of the other ones we're going to see. So let's move on to blogger. I will tell you, too, I'm not by any means an expert blogger, but this is an interesting sort of approach to putting out information. And there's a couple things that I want you to know. Number one, bloggers are about conveying facts, but they are also about engaging the reader. So whether it's getting the reader to sign up for the blog, click on additional links, look at other blogs, whatever it may be, they're trying to sort of build the clicks, build the contacts, build that network of things, right? This is Michael Hyatt is a blogger. I mean, look at this. I try to stick to 3 to 4 sentences. But look at his concern. His concern is that the content shouldn't look too dense. He doesn't want readers to give up and move on. This is a different approach than some of our assessment reports, clearly, right? If you think about the structure for a blogger, it's something like this, and I'm going to show you some other things in just a bit. But think about some of these tools. I need a compelling title, top 5 reasons, or you know, whatever it is that's going to pull people in. First paragraph is key, because if you don't make it through the first paragraph and keep reading, then we've lost them and we've kind of gone off that purpose of engagement, right? There should be graphic content to a blog. So we better have some images, pictures, whatever it may be. Often blogs are personal. So they're going to have that element of oftentimes the writer of the blog, some perspective, experience, something that they make link to that. There's an accessible main point, and oftentimes it's a singular point, right? And there's often a discussion question because you want to engage people at the end. Now, I think one of the dilemmas with talking about bloggers as a storyteller is we all go, oh, well, I don't write a blog. But how many times are we using these same kinds of approaches in other medium? Maybe it's a research note. Maybe it's a research presentation where we're going to set up these same kinds of structures. We have these same kinds of goals. Okay? So think about who uses this and when, or who could be using this and when they're trying to engage people, when they're trying to engage whether it's readers or audience members. One other sort of piece here, this is the perfect blog post. This is from a marketing website, but I think it's really interesting because it tells you some things about the structures and goals of bloggers. Your goal for the headline is to grab attention, okay? Because nothing else, if you look at it, your headline gets read more than anything else on the website. So that headline is not just your title, it is the piece that you're focusing on. Your opening has to have a key insight. Maybe you have another graphic piece on the side. You start using subheads as promises or big pieces. You've got the connecting emotionally, maybe the sound bite. I'm going to move down on the page a little bit. But you can see here, I've got the sound bite, the quote that maybe is going to come through, maybe another big promise or a subhead, and then I'm going to get to some how-to practical pieces. Not every blog is going to follow this structure, but look at this structure and think about assessment data, okay? And then you've got the end, which is the call to action. Now, the call to action in this case, given that this is by socialtriggers.com, is a buy or subscribe. And that may be true on a campus kind of piece, but it might not be buy or subscribe. It might be get more information, reach out to these people. It could be other things where you're trying to engage whoever pays attention to this information with next steps, right? All right, so let's go to that retention piece. How might I put together, let's say, a research note or a blog or whatever it might be in relationship to that retention piece? And you'll see I didn't finish this all up, but look at something like this. 5 things to know about retention. That's your headline. That's the part that's kind of going to engage you in. Now look at, when we think of the entering first-year student as excited, eager, committed to graduating, yet many students struggle and they don't make it at all. And then you go into personal. When I went away to college, I struggled with homesickness. Maybe you put a link to another post trying to engage people in the process, in the pieces. And then you start doing, in this case, 5 things. Number 1, not every student plans on graduating. And you put the data there. And look at how this actually, although it's kind of structured like a blog with graphics like a blog, it does kind of feel like a research note or a presentation or some other kind of piece. We're just using that structure and the lessons from a blogger as a storyteller. Okay, let's do artist. This is where we're going to start getting a little farther out there, or at least a little farther out of, I don't know, traditional comfort zones around assessment. Now, there's a lot of talk about data visualization right now, but a lot of that talk is how do I make a better graph or an infographic? And I want to push the envelope farther than that because artists are doing amazing jobs at storytelling in ways that are so far beyond the graph, okay? So let's talk about an artist as a storyteller. Their purpose is to convey meaning, Okay, now it could be visually, and I'm going to focus on visual, but even if you think about other kinds of artists, if you think about dancers or musicians, the purpose is to convey meaning. Not necessarily facts, but meaning. And often the purpose is to evoke a response. So if you think back to our original conversation about storytellers and emotions, it could be an emotional response. I love this quote by Degas because I think this is the difference between information and meaning. Art is not what you see, but it's making it's what you make others see. So rather than the whole picture, you focus them. You get them to see something maybe that they've seen before in a different way, or to focus on a different component of something. I mean, art is about focusing attention and evoking responses, right? Getting people to think differently. If you think about it, art kind of can extend or expand our shared common visual language. And when you think about visual artists, it is a visual language. And of course, people spend entire careers exploring and developing their visual language. Again, they're trying to evoke response, new ways to see familiar things, or maybe we're interpreting things. New situations, new events, making relationships, whatever it may be to get us to think differently. Now, visual artists, and again, for all those artists out there, bear with me, here's some of the tools that they use. Okay, very, very high level. This is what, Art 101. But they use things like lines, colors, shapes, textures, space, and forms, and combinations of those to draw attention, to, I don't know, make you notice different things, whatever it may be, putting those pieces together. And I like the second column, this notion of principles, because these are the pieces when you're putting together a visual kind of display of any sort that you're thinking about. And you're using unity and harmony to kind of create a uniform piece and give a feeling. Or maybe you're using balance or imbalance to draw attention, to make things stand out. You use things like hierarchies. You use scale and proportion, big and little, a whole field versus one giant. You use dominance and emphasis, and similarity and contrast. Similarity and contrast in textures, colors, images, whatever it may be. Now, what's interesting to me is some of the conversations that are happening around data visualization and charts and things touch on these. But I don't know how well we really think about some of these in ways. I think the visual designers definitely do, and I think the folks who are experts in charts and graphs and visual displays do, but I think the bulk of us take some little lessons and forget the principles and tools that are really underlying those and creating interesting things. So when I was thinking about kind of these concepts, these elements, these principles, and thinking about how would an artist tell the story? Now, I will tell you that the slides I'm going to show you have some text on them, and I'm not sure that a real artist would use text on them, but I did, because at some level, if I'm at the front of the room, I want some text up there for the different kinds of learners in my audience. But look at how the retention story feels when we put it in kind of this more artist language. 1% of students intend to leave. Now, I want you to notice kind of the use of some of those principles and elements. Look at the singularity of the one person. Look at the, I don't know, lack of stuff in the background. Look at the somber colors. Look at the feeling that it shows, and look at where your eyes go, and look at what you pay attention to. And imagine that on the big screen at the front of the room. Or, in whatever kind of context you might do it. 1% of students intend to leave. Another 7% are considering leaving. I don't know about you, I like this image because I've felt this before, and it's not a good feeling, right? So 7% are considering leaving. That's a reaction we want to kind of evoke. Now, look at how the story continues. I only have a couple more of these, by the way. So when we think about retention, notice the uniformity, notice the kind of harmony of this. Notice also that I've picked an image that is very familiar to many folks and many campuses, okay? So when we think about retention, look what we lose. By the way, just in case you're wondering, I did count the numbers of sections, and I did try to pick out kind of what to block out based on the percentages. So there is a little bit of rhyme or reason to this picture, but think about this, and think about this as a way to describe retention. And think about, when we think about retention, that's what we lose. I've seen another campus, I think it was University of Nebraska, Lincoln, did a page on their website that said 1% retention looks like this, and they had all the students that like equal 1%. That same sort of visual image. All right, and one more kind of picture for the artist perspective. We've done the, you know, lonely person leaving, head in the hands, look at what we lose. How can we make a difference? So that notion of some sort of evoking a response, prompting an action, and imagine those 5 slides kind of laying out the beginning of some conversations about retention and what we know. Now, I have to say the artist's perspective is interesting to me. Every time I've done this to a room of folks in an audience, everybody sort of engages in it in ways I don't see with other kinds of storytellers. They tend to lean in. They tend to kind of focus clearly. Part of it is probably the simplicity of kind of the words and some of the simplicity of the images, although I have to say, though, kind of on the flip side, if I had done 40 slides from this kind of artist perspective, I'm not sure that would work. I think it might get to be too much, maybe. I don't know. So one thing to kind of think about is where can we use this kind of artist approach, and how can we use it in ways that maintain the power of it. Okay, so let's do one more before we wrap things up, and let's talk about a preacher. Again, if you have this sort of background, bear with me and know that I don't know, I'm not well versed in this. I am using a fairly traditional kind of Christian preacher structure, just because it lends some, I don't know, ease to our conversation. But if you think about those folks as storytellers, they are trying to explain, they're trying to provoke, and they're trying to make applications for folks and get people to make applications in their thinking and in their lives, right? And if you think about it, they have a traditional structure that these kinds of sermons are based around. You define the text, whatever that text may be, often some sort of a Bible verse or something, that text piece. You kind of put it in the context of larger doctrine and meaning. You talk about the reasoning around it. Why does this matter? Why is it important to us? You talk about the application, and then typically you do some sort of epilogue where you kind of wrap it all up and put it all together. So these concepts, I think, are a little bit high level, so I want to take you through that retention story and what it might look like if I were, say, I don't know, the president, the director of retention, the VP in charge of talking about these things, you know, enrollment director, whatever it might be. How might I use this structure to put together a similar talk about retention? Okay, so let's look at what that might look like. If you think about it, in the case of this scenario, the text becomes something like strategic goal. Our goal is to achieve and maintain a first-year retention rate of 75%. And so we kind of lay that text out, and then we talk through the doctrine of it, which in essence for a campus is often, what does that mean? What does that mean in our context? So you might use doctrine like, what's our current retention rate? What's the history of retention rates? We might talk about why, or we might talk about the needed growth to get to this goal of 75%. We might even talk about how many more students is that, okay? So this is sort of giving that 75% meaning. Is that an increase? Is that a long way off? Is it a short way off? What does it mean in our context with what we have going on, okay? Then you start talking about the reasoning. Why is it important? Now, there's a number of ways you could make this kind of reasoning argument. I've given you three. One is an our bottom line. What are the consequences to our campus of enrollment loss or enrollment gain? You could actually do, a positive or a negative here. And what does it mean for our resources? What does it mean for, not just the budget part of it, but, the staffing levels, the support, the whatever it may be, all of those pieces that become kind of our bottom line. We could also make a reasoning argument that has to do with our students. Maybe even a personal story of a particular student. Why is a 75% retention rate important? It's important because of the difference we make to our students and their lives, right? That kind of piece of why are we, why do we care about retention? It's not about the 75 number. It's about the people involved, right? Or we could make a reasoning argument about our values. Things like, when we admit a student, we believe that they can be successful. We want to help them be successful. We believe in and some campuses have values like, we take in, the book. We have no selectivity. We take in all students and we help to move them along. And so connecting in with our values as an institution, our values as a community of higher education, you could use any of those, the things that we care about and we're committed to. Okay, changing the world, democracy, whatever it might be, what the values are becomes part of that reasoning piece. And then the final piece is application. Okay, so I've described for you what our text is. I've put it into context, the doctrine. I've given you the reasoning, why it matters. Now I tell you what we're going to do about it. Okay, so how will we fix it? This is what we're going to do. Let's all get on board. Now, I don't know about you, but when I really sat down and thought about this structure, I was amazed at how many times I've seen it used on campus, whether it's the state of the institution address by the president of the institution, whether it's, I don't know, director of enrollment talking, whether it's at orientation where we're talking to students and families. I just was amazed at how many times this structure is used, and used in very powerful ways to communicate retention data and what we're going to do about it. It's pretty cool. Okay, so I showed you the 4 types. I talked one story kind of through the thing. I talked why stories are I don't know, important, appealing, whatever word you want to use. So let's do some kind of quick kind of pulling it together and kind of a little bit to get you thinking about application. One of the reasons I think that thinking about different story structures and different storytellers can be important and or compelling is because we talk to different audiences. And different audiences want and need different things. There's no question, particularly when you think about assessment data or assessment results or changing or retention or whatever it may be, there are people that want the headline. There are people that are going to, or audiences that don't want tons of numbers. Tell me what the story is. Show me what the story is with the artist kind of piece. There are mediums that we're using to connect with audiences that could or should or do feel like blogs. So I think these kinds of, thinking about these different kinds of storytellers can help us address different kinds of audiences in very deliberate and thoughtful ways to prompt the things that we want to prompt and engage in the ways we want to engage. And if you think about these 4 different kinds, even and what they do, the journalist is about providing facts. So who do we need to provide facts for to enable their decision making? And how do we do that in ways that are smart and efficient? If you think about the blogger, they too are conveying facts, but they're conveying facts to engage and to continue that engagement. I had an audience member 2 weeks ago say, but shouldn't all of these engage? Maybe. But the blogger is very deliberate about engagement, about the power of the headlines, the pieces, the calls to action, all of those kind of elements to what they're doing with the purpose of engagement. The artist is about conveying meaning. So not just facts, but getting you to really think, react, respond, focus on something, to really, I don't know if engage is the right word, but think about something maybe in a different way. All right, evoke a response, get you to pay attention, and get you to probably keep attention and remember in ways maybe that aren't as deliberate in other kinds of storytellers. And then if you think about the sort of preacher structure, the preacher approach, it is about explaining something, so laying out that text and explaining it, provoking by talking to you about the why, and really being deliberate about application. What does this mean for what we do? Now, when I put these all up, it is interesting to think about, wow, why isn't engaging the reader or engaging the audience every place? Why isn't applying under every single one of these? And it could be, and I think that's one of the things to really think about, is that these don't have to be 4 separate kinds of storytellers. They don't have to be separate from a traditional storyteller. How can we combine elements to get even more power out of these stories? And so, kind of to wrap up, I really do want you to think about each of these approaches. What pieces might you use from these approaches? What things might you pay attention to differently? And for whom, which audiences, might they be most powerful? And are there ways to kind of quilt them together to create what we want to in terms of sharing information? Okay, so think about journalists, bloggers, artists, preachers, other storytellers. And if you want to go back and revisit the more traditional types of storytellers, we'll be doing that webinar at the end of the month, actually end of April, sorry. But I think, Liz, I think that's it for today's Storytelling Toolkit.
Great.
Liz.
Oh, yep.
Liz is on mute.
Yep, I'm off. Can you guys hear me?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. There is a couple questions. I'm going to go ahead and answer, though this is kind of a little bit of a silly question, but not silly. Sorry, Jamie. But your pictures on your PowerPoint slides.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll definitely share the slides, aren't we, Liz?
Yes, we're going to share those slides, and we'll go through that. Sorry, I looked at the question before. I saw a question before. If there are any other questions, go ahead and type them into the question window. Sky Factor Products and Services. This webinar has been sponsored by Sky Factor MapWorks. If you're interested in seeing a demo of that product where Sherry pulled a lot of this data from, we have one coming up this week. I believe it's on Thursday. Yep, Thursday, the 19th. So if you would like to sign up, you can get more information on our website. As Sherry mentioned, this session is being recorded. So we will follow up via email with these slides and a recording of this webinar. Please feel free to share that with your peers and colleagues. If you would like to sign up for additional food for thoughts, including one we have coming up in 2 weeks and a very interesting topic, it's campus climate and taking the pulse of your campus, you can find all of that information again on our website, which is www.skyfactor.com. Just go to the events library and you'll be able to sign up for many, many more of Sherry's very interesting webinars. I think we've got a lot of thank yous in the question field. Let me double check the chat. Nope, it looks like everyone is satisfied. So thank you again so much for coming, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.